Hi guys, tonight we're exploring the ultimate technological apocalypse. What if every piece of technology on Earth suddenly stopped working simultaneously? Cars dying on freeways, planes falling from the sky, and civilization grinding to an instant halt. If you enjoy these technological collapse sleep stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. And drop a comment letting me know what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. I love hearing from tech-conscious viewers worldwide. Alright, let's begin. Imagine for a moment that you're sitting in your car on the freeway, cruising at 70 miles per hour through downtown Los Angeles during the evening rush hour. The radio plays softly in the background, your smartphone charges on the dashboard, and ahead of you, a sea of red taillights stretches into the distance like glowing embers. Without warning, your engine sputters and dies. The power steering locks. The electronic fuel injection system fails. Around you, 40,000 other vehicles simultaneously coast to a halt as their computer-controlled engines cease functioning. Traffic lights go dark. Cell towers fall silent. In the span of a single heartbeat, humanity's technological umbilical cord is severed, and we find ourselves thrust back into a pre-industrial world with shocking, devastating suddenness. This scenario might sound like science fiction, but the implications are far more terrifying and immediate than any Hollywood disaster movie could capture. In our hyper-connected world of 2024, we've woven technology so deeply into the fabric of civilization that its sudden absence would trigger a cascade of catastrophic failures that would make the Great Depression look like a minor economic hiccup. We're not just talking about inconvenience here. We're talking about the potential collapse of modern society as we know it, with consequences that would ripple across every aspect of human existence within hours, days, and weeks of this hypothetical technological apocalypse. The immediate aftermath would be nothing short of chaos. Consider the simple act of breathing for the estimated 15 million Americans who depend on electrically powered medical devices to stay alive. Ventilators would fail instantly. Dialysis machines would shut down. Pacemakers, while battery-powered, would eventually lose their charge with no way to recharge. Hospital backup generators, dependent on electronic control systems, would remain silent. Within the first 24 hours, we could see hundreds of thousands of deaths simply from the failure of life support systems. Emergency services would be paralyzed, unable to respond to calls they couldn't receive through their digital dispatch systems, traveling in vehicles that wouldn't start to locations they couldn't navigate to without GPS systems. But the human toll would extend far beyond those dependent on medical technology. In New York City alone, with its population of 8.4 million people packed into just 300 square miles, the sudden failure of elevators would trap thousands of people in skyscrapers. The city's subway system, which carries 4.3 million passengers daily across 468 stations, would grind to a halt, leaving millions stranded underground or far from home. Water pumps would fail, cutting off the supply of clean drinking water to the city's residents. Sewage treatment plants would cease operation, creating immediate public health emergencies. Refrigeration systems in grocery stores and restaurants would fail, causing food to spoil rapidly and creating the potential for widespread foodborne illness outbreaks. The global food supply chain, a marvel of modern logistics that feeds 7.8 billion people, would collapse overnight. Modern agriculture depends entirely on technology, from GPS-guided tractors to automated irrigation systems to computer-controlled fertilizer application. The United States produces approximately 366 million tons of corn annually, much of it through precision agriculture that requires constant technological monitoring and adjustment. Without these systems, crop yields would plummet to levels not seen since the 19th century, when global population was less than 2 billion people. The just-in-time delivery system that keeps grocery stores stocked would fail immediately, as trucks couldn't start and inventory management systems couldn't operate. Consider the Port of Los Angeles, which handles approximately 9.3 million 20-foot equivalent units of cargo annually, making it one of the busiest ports in the world. Its operations depend entirely on computerized tracking systems, automated cranes, and electronic communication networks. Without these systems, the port would become a graveyard of stranded cargo containers filled with goods that couldn't be unloaded, sorted, or distributed. Similar scenarios would play out at the Port of Long Beach, the Port of New York and New Jersey, and every other major shipping hub around the world. The global economy, worth approximately $100 trillion in gross world product, would face an immediate shutdown as supply chains severed and financial systems collapsed. The financial implications alone would be staggering beyond comprehension. Modern banking exists almost entirely in digital form. The Federal Reserve estimates that only about 8% of US currency exists as physical cash, with the remaining 92% existing as electronic entries in computer systems. Credit cards, debit cards, electronic transfers, and digital payments would all become impossible. The New York Stock Exchange, which processes trades worth approximately $64 billion daily, would close indefinitely. ATMs would become useless metal boxes. The entire concept of money, as we understand it in the 21st century, would revert to whatever physical currency people happen to have in their wallets and whatever precious metals or barter goods they could acquire. Transportation systems would face complete paralysis. Commercial aviation, which carries approximately 4 billion passengers annually worldwide, would cease instantly. Modern aircraft depend on fly-by-wire systems, GPS navigation, air traffic control networks, and computerized engine management. The approximately 26,000 commercial aircraft currently in the sky, at any given moment, would be forced to make emergency landings at the nearest available airports, assuming their pilots could navigate without electronic instruments. Once on the ground, these aircraft would remain permanently grounded, as they couldn't operate without their computer systems. The railroad system wouldn't fare any better. In the United States, freight railroads carry approximately 1.6 billion tons of cargo annually, across a network of 140,000 miles of track. Modern trains use positive train control systems, computerized scheduling, and electronic switching to manage this vast network safely and efficiently. Without these systems, rail transport would revert to 19th century manual operations, but with 21st century traffic volumes that would make such operations impossibly dangerous and inefficient. Ships at sea would face particular challenges. While sailing vessels could continue operating, virtually all commercial shipping depends on GPS navigation, radar systems, electronic depth finders, and computerized engine controls. The approximately 55,000 merchant vessels currently traversing the world's oceans would find themselves navigating by stars and compass, assuming their crews still possess these traditional skills. Many wouldn't, having grown dependent on electronic navigation systems throughout their careers. Communication networks would vanish instantly, creating an information blackout of unprecedented scale. The Internet, which connects over 5 billion users worldwide, would disappear as routers, servers, and switching equipment failed. Television broadcasts would cease as stations couldn't operate their transmission equipment. Radio stations would fall silent as their digital broadcasting equipment and automated systems failed. Cell phone networks, which handle approximately 23 billion text messages daily in the United States alone, would become completely non-functional, This communication breakdown would have profound psychological effects on a population accustomed to instant global connectivity. Social media platforms like Facebook, with its 2.9 billion monthly active users, and YouTube, which processes over 1 billion hours of video daily, would simply cease to exist. The sudden silence would be deafening, both literally and figuratively. People would find themselves cut off not just from distant friends and family, but from the constant stream of news, entertainment, and information that has become integral to modern life. The energy sector would experience catastrophic failure across multiple systems. Nuclear power plants, which provide approximately 10% of global electricity generation, would face immediate safety concerns as their computerized control systems failed. While these plants have mechanical safety systems designed to shut them down in emergencies, the inability to monitor radiation levels, coolant systems, and other critical parameters would create potentially dangerous situations. The Fukushima Daiichi disaster demonstrated how quickly nuclear facilities can become hazardous when monitoring and control systems fail, and that incident involved only partial system failures at a single facility. Power grids themselves would collapse as the complex electronic systems that balance supply and demand across vast networks failed instantly. The United States power grid consists of approximately 600,000 miles of high-voltage transmission lines managed by a complex web of computer systems that constantly adjust power flows to prevent blackouts. Without these systems, the grid would likely experience cascading failures that would leave the entire continent in darkness. Solar panels and wind turbines, while potentially capable of generating electricity, couldn't feed power into the grid without electronic inverters and control systems. Oil refineries, which process approximately 100 million barrels of crude oil daily worldwide, would shut down completely. These facilities depend on computerized process control systems to manage the complex chemical reactions required to convert crude oil into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and other petroleum products. The sudden shutdown of refineries would halt production of transportation fuels, heating oil, and the countless petroleum-based chemicals that form the foundation of modern manufacturing. The healthcare system would face an unprecedented crisis within hours of the technological failure. Modern hospitals are essentially technological ecosystems, dependent on electronic medical records, computerized diagnostic equipment, digital imaging systems, and automated medication dispensing. The Mayo Clinic, for example, maintains electronic health records for over 6 million patients, all of which would become instantly inaccessible. CT scanners, MRI machines, digital X-ray equipment and laboratory analyzers would all cease functioning, leaving doctors without the diagnostic tools they've come to rely on. Pharmaceutical manufacturing would halt immediately, creating critical shortages of essential medications. The production of insulin, which approximately 37 million Americans with diabetes depend on for survival, requires precise computerized control of fermentation processes and quality testing. Blood banks would lose their ability to test donations for diseases and maintain proper storage temperatures. Surgical procedures would become extremely limited without electronic monitoring equipment, digital imaging for guidance, and the precise environmental controls that modern operating rooms require. The education system would face unprecedented disruption. With approximately 56 million students enrolled in K-12 schools across the United States, the sudden loss of educational technology would force a complete restructuring of how we teach and learn. Online learning platforms, which became crucial during the COVID-19 pandemic, and now serve millions of students globally, would vanish instantly. Educational software, digital textbooks, and computerized administrative systems would all become unusable. Teachers would need to revert to purely analog methods of instruction, using whatever physical textbooks and materials they could locate. Higher education would be particularly affected, as universities have invested heavily in digital infrastructure. Research projects dependent on computer modelling, data analysis, and electronic instrumentation would halt immediately. Scientific collaboration, which increasingly depends on digital communication and data sharing across global networks, would revert to the slow pace of paper-based correspondence. The loss of digital libraries and databases would severely hamper academic research and scholarship. Agriculture, the foundation of human civilization, would face a crisis that could threaten global food security within months. Modern farming operations depend on GPS-guided tractors that can plant seeds with centimetre-level precision, automated irrigation systems that adjust water application based on soil moisture sensors, and computer-controlled systems that apply fertilizers and pesticides at optimal rates and times. The average American farm produces enough food to feed 155 people, a productivity level made possible only through intensive use of technology. Without these systems, agricultural productivity would plummet to levels not seen since before the Green Revolution of the mid-20th century. Global grain production, which currently stands at approximately 2.8 billion tonnes annually, could drop by 50% or more in the first year. This would create immediate food shortages in urban areas, where most of the world's population now lives. Cities like Tokyo, with 37 million residents, or Delhi, with 32 million, simply cannot feed themselves from local agriculture and depend entirely on complex supply chains to bring food from rural areas. The livestock industry would face particular challenges. Modern animal agriculture depends on computerized feeding systems, climate-controlled environments, and automated monitoring of animal health. Large-scale poultry operations, which house hundreds of thousands of chickens in single facilities, require precise environmental controls to prevent disease outbreaks and maintain productivity. Dairy farms use automated milking systems and computerized monitoring of each cow's health and productivity. Without these systems, milk production could drop dramatically, and meat production would become far less efficient. Water systems would face immediate crisis in most developed nations. Water treatment plants use computerized systems to monitor water quality, adjust chemical treatments, and manage distribution pressure throughout municipal systems. The failure of these systems would compromise water safety for billions of people. In the United States alone, public water systems serve approximately 300 million people through a complex network of treatment plants, pumping stations, and distribution networks that all depend on electronic controls. Sewage treatment, equally dependent on computerized systems, would cease functioning properly, creating immediate public health hazards. Untreated wastewater would back up into homes and businesses, and treatment plants would be unable to process waste before discharging it into rivers, lakes, and oceans. The resulting environmental contamination could trigger widespread waterborne disease outbreaks, reminiscent of 19th century cholera epidemics. The manufacturing sector would experience complete shutdown, as modern factories depend entirely on computerized control systems, robotic assembly lines, and just-in-time inventory management. The automotive industry, for example, produces approximately 95 million vehicles annually worldwide through highly automated processes that require constant computer coordination. Assembly plants would fall silent, unable to coordinate the thousands of components that modern vehicles require. Chemical manufacturing, which produces the raw materials for everything from plastics to pharmaceuticals to fertilizers, would halt immediately. These facilities use computer-controlled processes to manage dangerous chemical reactions and maintain safety systems. The sudden shutdown of chemical plants would not only stop production, but could create environmental hazards if reactions couldn't be properly controlled or contained. The textile industry, which produces approximately 100 billion garments annually worldwide, would revert to manual production methods with drastically reduced capacity. Modern textile mills use computerized looms, automated cutting systems, and digital design software to achieve the scale and efficiency required to clothe the world's population. Without these systems, clothing production would drop to levels that could barely serve local markets. Construction would face immediate paralysis as modern building methods depend heavily on computer-aided design, GPS-guided earth-moving equipment, and sophisticated project management software. The construction industry, worth approximately $13 trillion globally, would need to revert to hand tools and manual methods, dramatically slowing the pace of building and infrastructure maintenance. Transportation of goods would become extremely challenging without the logistics systems that coordinate global supply chains. Walmart, the world's largest retailer, with revenues of approximately $573 billion annually, depends on sophisticated computer systems to manage its supply chain of over 150,000 suppliers. The company's distribution centers use automated systems to sort and route merchandise to its 10,500 stores worldwide. Without these systems, the company couldn't function at anywhere near its current scale. The sudden breakdown of technology would also reveal how dependent we've become on electronic systems for basic survival skills. Most people in developed nations no longer know how to navigate without GPS, tell time without digital clocks, or perform calculations without electronic devices. The average person carries a smartphone containing more computing power than NASA used to land on the moon, but many couldn't start a fire, purify water, or preserve food without modern conveniences. Financial markets would face not just closure but complete systemic breakdown. High-frequency trading, which accounts for approximately 50% of all stock trades, would cease instantly. The electronic systems that enable fractional reserve banking, credit creation, and monetary policy implementation would disappear. The Federal Reserve's ability to manage the money supply through electronic transactions would vanish, leaving monetary policy tools that haven't been used since the gold standard era. Insurance systems, which help society manage risk through electronic record-keeping and actuarial modeling, would lose their ability to function. Property and casualty insurers wouldn't be able to process claims, access policy information, or coordinate disaster response. Life insurance companies wouldn't be able to verify deaths or process beneficiary payments. The entire risk management infrastructure that enables modern economic activity would collapse. Social services would face unprecedented challenges in reaching those who need help most. Government agencies would lose access to databases containing information about benefit recipients, tax records, and social program eligibility. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which serves approximately 42 million Americans, distributes benefits through electronic cards that wouldn't function without computer networks. Disability payments, unemployment benefits, and other social safety net programs would be unable to reach recipients. Law enforcement would find itself operating with 19th century tools while facing 21st century challenges. Police databases containing criminal records, fingerprint files, and investigative information would become inaccessible. Modern forensic techniques dependent on DNA analysis, ballistics databases, and electronic evidence would be unavailable. The 911 emergency system, which handles approximately 240 million calls annually in the United States, would cease functioning entirely. The justice system would face severe disruption as electronic court records, case management systems, and legal databases became inaccessible. Law firms would lose access to legal research databases like Westlaw and LexisNexis, forcing attorneys to rely on physical law libraries that many jurisdictions no longer maintain. Electronic filing systems, video conferencing for remote hearings, and digital evidence management would all disappear. Military forces, despite their emphasis on preparedness and redundancy, would face significant challenges. Modern military operations depend heavily on GPS guidance, satellite communications, computerized weapon systems, and electronic intelligence gathering. While militaries maintain some analog backup systems, the scale and complexity of modern defense operations would be severely compromised. The loss of early warning systems, missile defense networks, and communications would create serious national security vulnerabilities. International relations would be fundamentally altered by the collapse of global communication networks. Diplomacy in the modern era depends on instant communication between governments, international organizations, and diplomatic missions. The United Nations, which coordinates humanitarian aid and peacekeeping operations across the globe, would lose its ability to communicate with field offices and coordinate responses to international crises. The space industry would face immediate crisis as ground control systems failed and satellites became uncontrollable. Approximately 4,000 active satellites currently orbit Earth, providing services ranging from GPS navigation to weather monitoring to communications. Without ground control, these satellites would gradually drift out of their assigned orbits, potentially creating collision hazards and eliminating the space-based services that modern civilization depends upon. Weather forecasting would revert to basic observational methods, eliminating the sophisticated computer models that currently provide detailed forecasts days or weeks in advance. The National Weather Service processes data from thousands of weather stations, radio sondes, and satellites through supercomputers to generate the forecasts that help protect lives and property. Without these systems, communities would lose advance warning of dangerous weather events like hurricanes, tornadoes, and severe storms. Climate monitoring would cease as the global network of automated weather stations, ocean buoys, and atmospheric sensors stopped transmitting data. Our understanding of climate change and environmental conditions would be set back decades, forcing scientists to rely on manual observations and basic instruments to track environmental conditions. The entertainment industry would face complete transformation as digital production methods, computer-generated imagery, and electronic distribution systems disappeared. Movie and television production would revert to purely analog methods, dramatically increasing costs and reducing production capacity. Streaming services like Netflix, which serves over 230 million subscribers globally, would vanish instantly. Video games, a $160 billion industry, would disappear entirely as gaming consoles and computers became inoperable. Publishing would face severe challenges as digital typesetting, electronic editing, and computer-aided design became unavailable. Publishers would need to revert to manual typesetting and physical printing processes, dramatically reducing the speed and scale of book and magazine production. Newspapers, already struggling with declining circulation, would need to rely entirely on manual printing processes that couldn't match the speed and distribution of modern printing operations. Sports and recreation would be affected as electronic timing systems, digital scoreboards, and computerized statistics keeping became unavailable. Major sporting events depend on sophisticated technology for television broadcasting, instant replay systems, and performance analysis. Professional sports leagues would need to revert to manual scoring and timing methods, fundamentally changing how games are played and presented to audiences. Tourism and travel would face massive disruption beyond just transportation failures. Hotel reservation systems, airline booking networks, and travel planning services would disappear instantly. The global tourism industry, worth approximately $1.3 trillion annually, would need to revert to manual booking and payment systems that couldn't handle current volumes of travelers. Scientific research would face severe setbacks as laboratory instruments, data collection systems, and analysis tools became inoperable. Climate research stations in Antarctica, which provide crucial data about global climate patterns, would lose their ability to collect and transmit information. Medical research would halt as laboratory equipment, data storage systems, and communication networks failed. The collaborative nature of modern science, which depends on rapid sharing of data and findings across global networks, would revert to the slow pace of paper-based communication. Environmental monitoring would cease as automated systems that track air quality, water pollution, and ecosystem health became inoperable. The early warning systems that help predict and respond to environmental disasters would disappear, leaving communities vulnerable to natural and man-made environmental threats. Conservation efforts would lose access to GPS tracking of endangered species, automated camera traps, and satellite monitoring of deforestation and habitat loss. The psychological and social impacts would be profound and long-lasting. Studies of major blackouts and communication failures suggest that people experience significant stress and anxiety when cut off from their usual information sources and social networks. The sudden loss of social media, instant messaging and video calling would force people to reconnect through face-to-face communication, but many would struggle with social skills that have atrophied in the digital age. Education would face not just technological challenges, but a fundamental rethinking of how knowledge is transmitted and preserved. Digital libraries containing millions of books, research papers, and educational resources would become inaccessible. Students accustomed to instant access to information would need to develop research skills based on physical books and manual note-taking. The collaborative learning enabled by digital platforms would disappear, forcing education back to traditional classroom and lecture-based methods. The scenario becomes even more complex when we consider that different regions of the world would be affected differently based on their level of technological dependence. Developed nations with highly automated systems would face more severe immediate disruption than developing nations with less technological infrastructure. However, developing nations would face their own challenges as they depend on technology imports and global supply chains that would be disrupted. Rural areas might initially fare better than urban areas, as they often maintain more traditional skills and have greater self-sufficiency in food production. However, modern farming operations in developed nations are just as technology-dependent as urban systems. Small subsistence farms in developing nations might actually have advantages in food production, though they would lose access to modern medical care, communication, and manufactured goods. The recovery from such a scenario would likely take decades and would require fundamental changes in how society organizes itself. Communities would need to redevelop local manufacturing capabilities, food production systems, and service provision that don't depend on global supply chains and electronic systems. The knowledge required to operate and maintain pre-electronic technologies would need to be relearned by populations that have grown up entirely in the digital age. Some conspiracy theorists have suggested that such a scenario could result from directed electromagnetic pulse attacks, solar flares of unprecedented magnitude, or coordinated cyber warfare. While these remain in the realm of speculation, the vulnerability of our interconnected technological systems to cascading failures is a real concern among security experts and system designers. The complexity of modern technological systems means that even partial failures can trigger unexpected consequences that propagate through interconnected networks. The social and political implications would be enormous, as governments would lose their ability to provide services, maintain order, and communicate with citizens. Democratic processes would be severely hampered without electronic voting systems, digital voter registration, and mass communication capabilities. Local governance would become more important as national and international coordination became impossible without electronic communication. Economic systems would need to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. The concept of corporations as we understand them today, with complex supply chains, electronic financial management and global operations, would need to be fundamentally restructured around local and regional capabilities. Banking would revert to physical transactions and manual record keeping, dramatically reducing the velocity of money and economic activity. The scenario serves as a stark reminder of how dependent modern civilization has become on technological systems that most people don't understand and take completely for granted. The failure of technology wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it would be an existential threat to billions of people who depend on technological systems for their basic survival needs. This thought experiment reveals the fundamental fragility underlying our modern technological civilization and forces us to consider whether our increasing dependence on complex, interconnected systems has made us more vulnerable rather than more secure. As we continue to integrate artificial intelligence, automation, and digital systems ever more deeply into the fabric of society, the potential consequences of systematic technological failure become even more severe and far-reaching than we might initially imagine.